right place. Everyone can see. So good morning. Welcome everyone to our ARC Northwest Coast Seldom Heard Forum. So this Seldom Heard Forum is run by myself. I'm the Public Involvement Manager for ARC Northwest Coast, if you haven't met me before. And also today here we have Dr. Shema Hassan, who's part of our Public Involvement team. Also Ruth Ball, and our Public Advisor Naheed Tahir, who is also the co-lead of this Seldom Heard Forum, and she's going to be speaking today. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping and just run you through the agenda for today, and we can get on with speakers. This is just our pictures so you can recognise us. So that's myself, Ruth, Shema and Naheed, who are running today's forum. So this is the agenda. So just doing introductions now. I'll be quick as I can. We've got Paula Byrne speaking first, then Tracy Patton, Naheed. Then we're going to have a short comfort break. And then we've got our fourth speaker, which is Sandra Smith. And then we've got a video from Phil Watson, who couldn't attend today as he's teaching. And then we've got Laura Machin. And then we'll have a short question time. And then it'll be the end of so if you can, please keep on mute through the presentations, just so it can be difficult to hear otherwise. We are recording this meeting, but and speakers will be pinned onto the screen. But if you would not like to have your face being visible, please do feel able to turn your video off. If anyone doesn't want their presentation or their story to be mentioned, please do contact us. We do understand there can be sensitive material, and we are able to edit today's content if necessary. So if you're unhappy with anything that's said, please let us know. If anyone does get upset during this meeting, you can talk to one of us privately, either in a breakout room or after the meeting. So please do contact myself, Ruth, or any of the other members of the team if you would like to do that. Please use the chat function to make comments about the presentations today, or to ask any questions, and then we'll pick those up during the Q&A time at the end. And yeah, if you're on Twitter, please do tweet about today. Our ARC Northwest Coast hashtag is there, and you can also do hashtag Seldom Heard Forum. Thank you. So I'm going to go through these today. But our vision in the ARC is to improve health equity and applied health research through the voice of the population. Now I'm going to, we created the Seldom Heard Forum to hear from groups which maybe are less heard from in research, and to give people an opportunity to share issues experienced by these seldom heard groups, and to share good practice around applied health related research and enhancing inclusion. So we've done several of these seldom heard forums, and obviously today's forum is about adoption and fostering. I'm not going to go through this slide. I'm going to move straight on to our first. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So if we can have Paula Byrne, are you happy to get started?
Yeah, sure. Let me just find my. I thought I had it.
Ruth might be able to share the slides if you haven't got them, because I think you sent the presentation.
Yeah, Ruth, would you mind sharing my slides? I had them open and now they've disappeared. And rather than mess around with everybody, do you mind sharing your version? Or your, thank you so much. That's great. Okay. So welcome. Thank you for coming. My name's Paula Byrne, and I've got two roles here. One is that I'm an academic and part of the PPIE group. And also I'm a foster carer with my husband here in Cumbria. So I have a very kind of interesting viewpoint, because I can see, you know, kind of where adoption and fostering sit, but also I have the lived experience of actually being a foster carer, and we have only fostered teenage people, young people, deliberately because of our backgrounds. My husband worked with young offenders in prison, and I have a background within academia of mental health, so we thought we had a good fit there. I guess what I wanted to start with is to say that adoption and fostering, extremely emotive subject areas and very political. But as an academic, what I'd like to start with is for us to think about that how we treat the most vulnerable in our society reflects how we think about those people. So if we are a mature, developed society, then we look after the most vulnerable, and how we look after the most vulnerable is also interesting for us to look at, especially around young children. And, you know, there's been a whole catalogue of, you know, very, very upsetting and very difficult stories about both of those domains that I'm sure we'll come to discuss at some point. So I wanted to kind of set the context here around, you know, what we're talking about, and to be mindful that you know, these experiences can be very, very challenging. Okay, so this is very, very briefly, this is really a hop, skip and a jump through this, because we could talk about this for months. I'm going to talk about what is adoption and fostering, what is the terminology, the very brief history of where we are today, some statistics, and also who is responsible for these children. And the terminology is that we don't call them foster children, we call them children looked after, because the connotations that go with fostering can be quite pejorative. Okay, have the next slide, please, Ruth. Okay, and here are the kind of, differences between adoption is a legal procedure which transfers the parental responsibility to adoptive parents. It's incredibly unusual for an adoption to be reversed, but there are breakdowns in adoption that can happen. Fostering is where a child is taken from the birth parent or parents, and the foster carers provide a safe and nurturing environment for a child who cannot live with their birth parents at that moment. There are very, very different types of fostering. We in the UK are predicated on the idea that children should be with their birth parents. That is the kind of baseline. So local authorities who are responsible for any child that goes into care try to work very hard to keep the child with the birth parents, or to get them back with their birth parents, maybe after a time during being fostered. So you can have long and short-term fostering. Family and friends fostering, as it says, is about, you know, people around the child or the family that can offer a place. Kinship, whereas, you know, one of the family or many parts of the family can help with that. Emergency is usually when the environment in which the child is living is deemed unsafe, and the police usually get involved with that, and that can happen, you know, at any time during night or day. Respite and short breaks, when foster carers themselves potentially need a little bit of break from their children. You can have remand fostering, fostering for adoption, where you're actually preparing the child and the adoptive parents for that event. You can have specialist therapeutic foster carers, where, you know, very highly trained individuals who are dealing with very traumatic children. A lot of children who come into foster care have very complex needs, not just emotional, but can be physical and behavioural as well. And there's a lot of training that goes around there. We also have parent and baby fostering, where somebody has been identified as potentially needing a lot of support to be able to look after a baby. So they actually live with a foster carer, and the foster carer encourages and supports that parent or parents to look after the baby, and then move into their own accommodation after that. Next slide, please, Ruth. So very, very brief history of fostering. We can trace it back to, you know, kind of the Victorian times, really, and workhouses where Reverend John Olmsted put them with foster families. Conditions were so bad, and being a man of the cloth, decided that this wasn't good enough. The local council then became legally responsible for children. Before that, children were just, you know, left to their own devices. Same time, these, you know, Barnardo's, the National Children's Home, and a very unfortunately called Waifs and Strays Society was formed at that time. Barnardo opened the first residential care home in 1868.
Baby.
Sorry? I can't see anybody saying something. No?
If you could just have everyone on mute, please, other than the speaker.
Okay. And 1929, that's a kind of, you know, kind of line in the sand where the local authority became responsible for children in care. Massive shift in who then became responsible for them. Children Act 1989. This is, you know, again, a moment where statute came into place to make sure that children were looked after, and they also at that 1989 decided or made sure that there were secure homes for children and also custodial accommodation, so that they weren't with adults, they were with actual children, other children, and they were looked after in that particular way. Thanks, Ruth. Next slide, please. Okay, adoption. Again, very, very brief. Ancient Rome, I was interested to find this out. Actually, this was practiced amongst very wealthy families. There was a tendency in Rome for children to die. And so what they did is they wanted the family name to continue, so they would adopt other children from other wealthy families. It didn't happen amongst less wealthy families. Medieval times, children without parents, they were often put as apprentices into a trade. Okay, and in the Victorian era, we're all probably aware of the workhouse ethic of, you know, the feckless poor. Children were made to work. There was no such thing as childhood, and, you know, lots of very early death. The first adoption law in the UK was brought in 1926. And just to remark that, you know, since post-1970, adoption rates have fallen dramatically. And I've put up a few reasons here potentially for that fall. Different societal attitudes. Prior to the 1960s, people were expected to be married to have children. Children born outside of being married were, you know, kind of called illegitimate. Birth control methods came in. They were, you know, widely available. Family planning services, and the legalization of the termination of a pregnancy came in as well. So adoption rates came down because there were less children. Okay, thanks, Ruth. Next slide. Okay, and here's some statistics. I'm sorry, this is a bit doom and gloom, I have to say, for children looked after. The number of children that are coming into care is growing faster than the actual population of children. There are over 82,000 children in care in 2022. Interestingly, for us to think about around inequalities and you know, what we need to be thinking about in this forum is that you're more likely to be in care if you're male, if you're Black or mixed ethnicity, but interesting, very low rates amongst Asian backgrounds. The majority of children who are looked after are in care due to abuse or neglect. Those are the kind of key reasons why. Other reasons for children being in care include family dysfunction or inacute stress, a child's disability, a parent's illness or disability, or socially unacceptable behaviour. To be in care, you have to have a care order, and that has to go through the courts. And whoever is giving that care order has to be satisfied that there are no other avenues for that child to remain where they are in that environment. Okay. Just wanted to mention the COVID pandemic because that created lots of issues for fostering and probably adoption as well. Because of the inability to see people, to go and visit, we have ended up with, you know, families being hidden. And again, with schools going online, schools can be a great place for children to find a place to talk about what's going on at home and to find people who can, you know, support them. So of course, now we have post-pandemic a lot of school absences as well. So we have a lot of children that we can't see. Okay. And of course, the effect of mental health on children and adults as well has been significant since the COVID pandemic. Thanks, Ruth. Next slide. In adoption, we see often the same pattern that children over 5, male and from an ethnic minority background with a disability or in a sibling group are less likely to be adopted. Care leavers refers to people who are leaving the care system. So we look after children recently until they're 18, but we now have in place a policy where this carries on until 21. All right, it's not quite the same as being fostered, but it gives these care leavers an opportunity to get into a job, get you know, into accommodation or get into higher education. However, we have care leavers are 25% of the homeless population, and 25% of the adult prison population have previously been in contact with the criminal justice system. Oh, sorry, have been in contact with the care system. And then nearly 50% of under 20-year-olds in contact with the criminal justice system have spent time in care. So we can see there is a pattern of young people leaving the care system and then cascading into the criminal justice system. 41% of care leavers aged 19 to 21-year-olds are NEETs, not in education or employment. So again, we have this drop-off point when these young people leave care. They don't have the qualifications or the skills to be able to go into further education or higher education. And we can see from the last one, I mean, care leavers, if you looked at what local authorities offer for care leavers to go into higher education, it's an incredible package. It really is. Everything is paid for. But the numbers are so low of care leavers going into higher education when we compare it to the wider population. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that throughout this kind of, you know, this journey that young people go through, their opportunities to move into society as a young adult, fully prepared and able to be invested in, is very, very low. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and just to do a little bit of a summing up, I'm sorry it's been such a very quick jump through this, but what we have within the social care system is fiscal tensions. Local authorities have, for some time, and we can probably trace it back to austerity, have not been able to provide the fostering opportunities for everybody. So this has created private care providers to fill the gap. And they are businesses, and I'm not suggesting anything other than that they try to do the best, but there is money involved. So you will often hear on the news about, you know, local authorities not having enough money. I'm not talking about Birmingham because that's a totally different thing, but being able to actually find a budget to look after young children or care leavers is incredibly hard. They are very, very expensive. Again, to just reiterate that point I started at the beginning, as an academic and as a kind of carer, how we look after our most vulnerable should be how we think of ourselves as a society. Okay, it's, you know, this is for me incredibly challenging to manage children who are looked after when you are fostering them around their birth parents as well, because there are so many issues and, you know, kind of upset and all kinds of things. It's very, very difficult to help navigate that pathway. Also, from my experiences as well, the early trauma from pregnancy onwards has long-lasting impacts on these young people. and being able to manage that can be incredibly difficult for the young person, and to get the support as well is very difficult. We can consider that there are cycles of family behaviour overshadowed by inequalities, lack of opportunity, all of those things that we know about within health inequalities. Those are exacerbated within fostering and potentially in adoption places as well. Support, where it can be found, there is a widening gap in inequalities around young people and how they can find support. Okay, I hope I haven't gone over too much time. Thank you for listening. Do we do questions now, or do you want to wait for a discussion point?
I think we've had a few questions in the chat, but we'll keep them to see if we've got time at the end. But otherwise, we can also reply to them in the chat. Thank you so much, Paula.
Okay. Thank you.
Fascinating. So much for us to discuss. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Tracy, who is going to talk to us about adoption support group that she runs. Would you like to? Have you got a presentation, Tracy, or are you going to just speak?
I've got a very, very short one. I'm just going to see if I can share it.
I have it if you need it, Tracy.
Yeah, I thought I knew how to do this, but now I'm struggling a bit, to be honest, Ruth.
Do you want to put it up, Ruth, and we can just share it from our end?
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. You can just tell us when you want to move on slides and things. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you, Paula, because that was so interesting. I'm an adoptive parent. I adopted a little girl. I've got 4 children. And I've sort of fallen into this role as being as creating this adoption support group due to the fact that there wasn't anything really where we live that was offering the support that we needed. Adopted a long time ago and struggled right throughout with support. So sort of this came about by chance because I was chatting to a lady who was desperate for support, and we thought, let's support each other, and it's grown from there. So if you press the next slide. So established a group in 2018 where we just literally had a few of us that got together through word of mouth, that we knew of each other. We meet on a monthly basis, and we now have 23 members. Yeah, as I've already said, it's just through word of mouth. It's not openly advertised. It's quite difficult to advertise an adoption support group with confidentiality, you know, birth parents and things. It can be quite difficult, quite challenging. And we have families that come from across the Liverpool City region. So we do have families that come from Liverpool, even though we are based on the Wirral. And we do have members who can't access the group. They will then access online support rather than face-to-face meetups. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Ruth. So after the group had started in 2018, we decided there was so much more that we could do. I created a little logo and a name, and we began to look at what else we could do. We've recently shared our Facebook page, and we've got some funding for our group through a company in Liverpool. And we've managed to get little pots of funding from places, but we are just a group of adoptive parents supporting each other. Yeah, that's next slide, please, Ruth. This is just a photograph of some of the little boxes that I created for new families. So the ones that have adopted recently, we made a little, just a little resource box of attachment friendly things in. Ideally, what I'd love to be able to do is to offer a box with a little flyer in about our adoption support group so that we can get in earlier rather than waiting for the families to be absolutely desperate before they find us. Okay, thanks, Ruth. This is just one of the sponsors of our group, Ripstone, and what they said about our group. Thanks, Ruth. And some of the feedback from our parents who come along, I think just finding people who go through similar circumstances is invaluable. So yeah, you know, it's just amazing to chat to people who get it. Listening to Paula talk was just, you know, immense with all the statistics and things like that. Yeah, just finding a group of people who can relate to what we're going through is just the power of that, really, is immense. Thanks, Ruth. And what we plan to do next, we just would really like to reach more families, which is why I'm here today, really, to talk a little bit, spread the word and continue to develop more resources. We have been in, since I've shared the Facebook page, we have had a couple of contacts from some adoption agencies asking if they could share our group. So we are hoping that we will get more members. Yeah, and we met last night, and some of the conversations that took place were, again, a little bit like Paula said about early childhood trauma. We call it in our group modern adoption, so that things have changed and the children that are placed for adoption are the ones that have all avenues have been explored. They can't stay with birth family. They can't stay within the family. They can't be returned back to birth parents. So they are the ones that do have the highest adverse childhood experiences, neglect and abuse, sadly, for them. We do need to look at that, because the stress that has had on them impacts obviously on them, but also on us as adoptive parents. We need the support, which is why our group has been so invaluable for so many. From a health point of view, for a few things that were mentioned were diagnosis. A lot of our children have lists of diagnosis. They find school extremely difficult, and a lot of them will as teenagers, will become more at risk of self-soothing through things like alcohol and drugs. They have difficulty, generally within the group, all of our children interestingly have diagnosis of ADHD and things like that, ADHD and autism, all struggle with sleep and all struggle with their mental health. And that obviously has an impact on us as parents, and a lot of our parents then struggle with their mental health. We do have the ability to access an adoption support fund, which the government have made available, but it's difficult to access a personal package, because what our children need, if it is available on the NHS, were to access it through the NHS. We can't make a bespoke package of what we would like for our children. Sometimes a lot of frustration comes from once they are adopted, they're not within the care of the local authority anymore. A lot of parents then feel despair and desperation of waiting times and of accessing things that maybe they would have been able to access when they were within the care of the local authority. And just research, we know that adverse childhood experiences, we know the research has been done, that's, things like if you have 3 adverse childhood experiences, you're more likely to develop heart disease, 4 or more likely to have depression, and 6 or more can reduce life by up to 20 years. We know this, but we feel like there's a big gap in early years, what happens in that time before teenage, and then into adulthood. We feel as parents there should be early intervention, a lot more intervention sooner. Well, the research is there, we know that, the statistics are there, Paula's just gone through them, but they are falling through the gaps. So that's why I was, you know, hoping to come and speak today. So thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. That was really amazing to hear about the group. And so often I think it's people that are living, you know, that understand what kind of support you need and can really understand each other. I don't know, Paula, have you had any involvement with any kind of parent support groups or anything like that through your?
Yeah, I think Tracy, lovely talk. Thank you so much. And you touched on so many things that, you know, have a resonance for us. And I think this highlights the difference between adoption and fostering, because within fostering, you are surrounded by, you know, you're fostering. We're with a fostering agency, and we have support groups. We have reps who look after, you know, if you've got any problems or any complaints. You know, we have people that know how to pull the strings. You know, if we have a child, you know, in, you know, really at an acute moment, you know, we can then get somebody to help us. Whereas I think with adoption, and I think this is true, you don't have that support network, which is, you know, I think you're just left to your own devices in effect. Whereas with fostering, you know, essentially there are many people involved, possibly too many people involved, because then the message gets lost in the translation. But I would say that within my experiences of fostering are that you get a lot of support.
I think it's really sad that adoptive families are making comments such as, would they be better back in foster care?
I know.
To get that support.
Yeah, totally.
You know, I've done my best. I've tried so
Yeah.
hard to get them what they need,
yeah.
but I can't get that. So,
Exactly.
you know,
yeah,
that's where the difficulties lie, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think
support
that
just disappears once the adoption has gone through.
Yeah, I think this comes back to this conceptualization of children who are adopted are somehow immune and immune from all of the trauma that they've experienced, and somehow being put into an adoptive family that's going to magically disappear because of the love that you give them. And we both know that that is complete and utter nonsense. It's no matter, we all love and nurture, but you need support for all of the trauma that these children have been through, and support for managing those children, looking after those children as well. Yeah.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions in the chat, and there's a comment for you, Tracy, so if you want to take a look, and we'll come back to them in the break. So I'm going to move on now, and we'll come back to Paula and Tracy when we get the Q&A session. So I'm going to move on to our third speaker, who is Nahid Tahir, one of our ARC public advisors. So are you ready, Nahid?
I am, yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Nahid Tahir, and I am an advisor with the North West Coast. I'm going to be speaking to you today about my own lived experience. I am the little girl who's in the lap. And this is a very early picture of when I was first fostered. I'm probably only a few weeks, couple of months old there. I was fostered when I was about a week old. My mum came to the UK and under very difficult circumstances had to give me up to a fostering family so she could sort herself out. I was with my foster family for about 4 years. And in that time, I only had visits maybe annually of my mum. A lot of what I've learned from when I was fostered is obviously what I've picked up as I've got older and I realised I was fostered. So photograph that you're seeing is something that was in a shoebox along with some other things, which were passed to me when my mum passed away. And then that's why I started looking into my past. As Paula and everyone before me has said, the impact on children who are fostered is something that we all need to reflect on. As you can tell, it is difficult for me to speak about it, but I think it's how you treat it initially. And Paula very rightly has said that children from Asian backgrounds are very rarely fostered, but also even more rarely adopted. And one of the reasons for that is that it's a very close-knit community and it's a very big taboo subject. A lot of children are actually adopted, but they're adopted within families. So they are, if someone has a baby, say, you know, their third or fourth child, they will give it to somebody in the family who is not able to have any children. So that does happen a lot in Asian families, but they do tend to try and keep children. You know, there's not a lot of education about contraception and things, and sometimes if they're having more than, say, 4 children, then the other children are passed on to their families. The impact, as you can see, on someone who is fostered. So I was fostered for 4 or 5 years, and then after that my mum came to get me, and she was in a new relationship, and then I was adopted by her partner. Even from a young age, you do realise that there is something different about you. The impact of having, you know, a family, all those words that I've written down, they're the kind of things that do affect you even as an adult when you're growing up. Just need a minute. And one of the things is it is cultural issues. For me, I was brought up in a very white family. I was fostered in a white family. So when I came out of fostering to go into, even though I was 5, 6, I was then put into, you know, with my mum. I was fortunate I didn't have my biological mum then, but I went into a community, into a culture that I didn't recognise. And as you, I'm sure you all know, a child is a sponge. So anything that I picked up on from birth to 5, 6 years old, that was my foundation. And for me, I felt very culturally different, even within my family home. All the things that everyone has said, I acted out. I didn't feel as if I fitted in. I was rejected. And even though I was only one parent I was adopted by, I still felt that, you know, that relationship difference. So I had 2 other siblings who were younger than me, but I was still treated different by my adopted father than I was. You know, the other 2 were treated differently to what I was. And as I grew older, became a teenager, I'd done all those things that you read in the media, and I acted out. I, you know, left school. I didn't have any formal education. But one of the things that does happen in Asian families is they tend to keep adoption or fostering a secret. So nobody really knows. As I've grown older now, I actually have only met, I think, 2 people who have been adopted. And one of those people was 18 when she found out. I was in my early 20s when I found out that initially I'd been fostered, and then I was also, my stepdad, who I thought was my biological father, wasn't my biological father. He was my stepdad, and he'd adopted me. And growing up, I always, you know, when I said that, I always used to feel differently. I remember one time there was an occasion when I found my birth certificate and my name was different to that of my siblings. And I did question it. And it was brushed under the carpet, and then the next time that birth certificate disappeared. And I've actually never seen my original birth certificate, but when I tried to trace my biological father, I did get an adoption certificate. You which I wasn't aware of. Building relationships, pressures from community, all these things are quite active in Asian communities and other ethnic minority communities, unfortunately. This is one of my early photos as well with my adopted, the young lady, she's my adopted mum. And, I can still remember the families and the other children who I was with. I've all, obviously this is ARC Northwest Coast, and there is a lot of research out there, and it does help to understand, fostering and adoption. But for me, I think the right kind of research is needed, and in order to do what Paula has said and, give the care to not only adopted families, but also adopted children, the right kind of research is what's needed to be done. And we need to, have, this shouldn't be a taboo subject, and especially in ethnic and minority families. I know someone wrote in the chat that why aren't there, why they aren't taken up. But that is one of the main reasons, because everybody wants a newborn child, number one, and it is very, very challenging. I've come out the other end, and despite all those challenges, I am okay. But it is very difficult for someone to consider and say, well, can I, bring up a child? This is one of my favourite photographs, because this is a photograph that when I received my little shoebox, and it was my first birthday. So I know that was a special day that my foster family celebrated just for me. So, I'll just start on again.
Do you want to put those last slides up, Nahid?
Yeah, I'll just put it up again. So I don't know if anybody has heard of a program that's called Black Child, White Nanny. And this is on Channel 5 on Catch Up, so you can see it there. And it's about families between the 1960s to around the late 1970s, and it was mostly Nigerian families, up to nearly 70,000, who were privately fostered by white British families with no formal regulations. And the practice continued. It does very rarely continue even now, but it stopped in the early 2001 and came to an end after there was more stringent measures that were implemented by law. And that is a really good documentary for you to see the history also of fostering early on, and also maybe to answer the question of Dorcas, what she said as well. So my journey, as I said, has culminated in me being a family court magistrate. So for me, that is a massive achievement, but also for me personally, I feel that I'm the voice of the child, because as a magistrate, and especially in the family court, I see a lot of fostering cases. I see a lot of children who are children in need, children who are being looked after, who are in care. And for me to be able to relate to that and see that, what everyone is saying about the local authority, we are inundated at the moment with children who are in care. There are that many that, on a daily basis, I am seeing dozens and dozens of children that are going into foster care. We really do need to look after our children here, and we all need to reflect on what we can do, because it really does affect their mental health. From a young age, these are, young children who are, for whatever reason, they are going into a system. I see newborn children being taken away from their parents, And on very rare occasions, I know Paula did say, you know, adoption is supposed to be permanent, but on rare occasions, I actually see children who are adopted being given back. So you can imagine the mental anguish and the impact on those children who suddenly do find a home and they're not thrown back into the care system. But for me, as I said, you know, for me, I feel as if that's a calling. I'm very proud to be a family magistrate and in some way be able to contribute to the children. And that's the end. Thank you very much. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Thank you, Naheed. That was a very moving story. You're amazing inspiration, and we're very lucky to have you. And thank you for sharing your story with us today. I think we all need a moment now. It's upsetting, isn't it? So yeah, unless anyone wants to say anything to Naheed, we'll move to a short break just to take a moment on there. We'll be back in 5 minutes. That's okay, everyone. Thank you again. I'll just give everyone another 60 seconds to come back. Right. I think everyone hopefully is back with us. If you can turn your camera on if you want to, just to let us know you're back. But again, just want to say thank you to Naheed for sharing her very moving lived experience about her own life and experience of fostering and adoption. We next up have our next speaker, Sandra Smith, who is another one of our ARC Northwest Coast public advisors, who's also going to speak about her lived experience around fostering and adoption. Are you ready, Sandra?
I am, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Naheed, I don't really know how I can follow that. That was yeah, exceptional. Right, but for me, I was a foster carer with my husband. We had to give it up when he was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. But I done emergency placement and respite. So I was a European business manager, traveling all over the place, but I spent a lot of time working from home, so I could fit around, particularly the respite and the emergency. But I always used to think about when we got an emergency placement, you weren't given really any time to prepare. You know, you get a phone call, it could be any time of the day, any time of the night. I remember getting one at, you know, I think it was about 11 o'clock at night saying, there's 2 young children, we want to place them with you because the police are going to do a drug raid on the house. So I was all geared up, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was stood down because it wasn't needed. But then, you know, a couple of weeks later, again, another drug raid at a family, and I had a young child come who was really quite distressed. But when we used to do sort of the respite, you had a bit more notice. So you could have a chat with the social workers, get a bit of an in feel for what the child was about. But it never really ever gave you the full details. I mean, remember I had one particular child who wouldn't come in the house. And eventually she come in the house and the social worker just left. And a comment to me was, just get on with it. Yeah, just get on with what? I said, well, I'm actually going to go make us a drink, and would you like something to eat? And she went, well, everywhere I go, I just get battered, so why don't you just get on with it? Whoa. So I brought her in, eventually taught her in, sat her down and said, look, we're not going to, we just want to look after you. We want to support you. Would you like a drink? And, oh, yeah. And as she settled down, I said, I'll come and show you your room. You're going to say, oh, I've got a double bed. And she became really sort of excited, which later, weeks and weeks later, I found out that, she sort of said, I just assumed that it'd be another place where I'd just be battered, because I was sent round all the family all the time. And she was actually quite an intelligent child. She was quite observant. But we managed to bring, this out in her. And then the parents were sent for parenting classes, etc., etc. And she eventually went back. And I remember meeting her a couple of years later, and she went, "You've given me my life," which was a real sort of, no, I didn't really do anything. It was all you. No, you put me on the right road. So it was a really good, feedback. But then we had other children that come in. I remember having a child who was about 8 who didn't know how to use a knife. She'd only ever used a fork, and she used her fingers. So, I gave her this knife and fork. She went, oh, I don't need them. My mum says I don't have to use that. So she hadn't been taught any sort of social skills either. So we take her out for a meal and take her to a restaurant, and so she'd see other people, and she went, I want to be like them. So it was about, not just about us looking after sort of a well-being, but also about looking after her integration into sort of society. Another time, again, we had a emergency call, and initially when we went to do fostering, we said, we wanted sort of children between the age of 4 and 10. That went out the window. It was, apart from babies, because we didn't have equipment for babies, it was anything from age 4 up to 16, 17. And we had a phone call. We've got a girl in town being picked up. Her father's thrown her out. It's her 16th birthday. And basically she come into the house, and it was, you're an adult. She said, I'm an adult now. My dad says I'm on my own. We only had her overnight. Social services then placed her in a long-term foster care, because the father just didn't want to know she was an adult. Some of the other things that we had was, like, for example, a mum had been sent to prison because she never went to school. So this child was placed with us, and the child had alopecia, and she had a wig. And she says to me, when I put her to bed, she was really fine, "Can you wash my wig?" I went into panic mode. How do you wash a wig? I have no idea. So sort of at 9 o'clock at night, I'm on the phone to my hairdresser, saying, help, how do I wash this wig? What am I supposed to do with it? Because I was absolutely terrified of the poor child getting up the next morning and this wig being just a complete mess. And so it was, me looking at, okay, I've got this child, I don't know what to do. Because there were numerous occasions when I don't know what to do, but you just tried your best. And actually it turned out quite well, because she was quite pleased with this wig, because I blow dried it, and all thanks to the hairdresser. So for me, being sort of a foster carer it wasn't about the child as well. It was about me, and about me learning, and about me giving something back, and about them going, back to the family, because the majority of them went back to the family, but seeing that the parents or the family had support to be able to get them back home, but me to give the child what they could get from their parents when they went back home, about, Mum, can you teach me this? Or Dad, can you teach me this? Or so yeah, it was, although it was hard. I mean, we had one particular child who actually confided in me that the mother's boyfriend used to beat her up. So it went through social services, but in general, it was all a positive, really positive outcome. I know for me, but I believe for the children, because I got lots of letters saying, thank you for this. So that was sort of my experience of being a foster carer. I'm still in touch with lots of friends that I made who were also foster carers, because we used to, like you say, the adoption, we used to get together, and I still have chats with them, and they're saying, Sandra, it's even harder now because of COVID, because some of the children have got to the point of being really quite distressed because intervention's been so late or so far down the road. And I think, you know, from what we're looking at now, a lot of the children are older that are going into foster care and have more needs. And that's the message that sort of we're hearing now. So that was literally just a quick overview of sort of from my perspective of being the foster carer. But I didn't use the word care, I used the word more support. And that's what I was there. I was supporting that child through a difficult time so that they could go back into the family environment to carry on with their lives. So that's a quick summary from me.
Thank you, Sandra. It was so like, must have been so hard to have these children just come, and but I like the way that you talk about it as a support, you know, and that you didn't necessarily.
That's why I done it as a support.
Yeah. A difficult time in people's lives just needed somebody like you to be there for them.
But and I think that's why in a way that's why sort of foster carers, or you know, looked after children as we call them now, you know, because they can give that back. They know that they're also going to get something back in return, whether it be, you know, even if how difficult it is at times, you know, it's that giving that, you know, and that's what they say. Sometimes they say, you know, if you foster or you adopt or even you're doing volunteering, it helps your mental health and well-being.
Yeah. We're just going to get ready to put a video on. So our next speaker is Phil Watson, who is a foster carer and also an adoptive parent, and he supports Liverpool City Council fostering. I was lucky to interview him for over an hour, so we've got a longer video which hopefully we'll put on the ARC website, because it was a absolutely fascinating and moving speech from Phil about his experiences. I think both myself and Sean were crying and laughing throughout it. I'll pass on to Sean, who's going to share the video, but thank you.
Hi, so hello, my name's Phil Watson. I think I'm about as ordinary a person as you can imagine. I'm married, 2 kids, live in a Pebble Dash semi-detached house in South Liverpool, just round the corner from Penny Lane that most people around the world have heard of. I'm a teacher. My wife used to work for the council. We got 2 birth kids. Everything was chugging along very happily. And then my wife kind of one day said, "Shall we foster?" And I went, this sounds a bit male. I kind of went, "Yeah, all right, well, what is it?" I mean, I know a bit because I'm a teacher, but my wife took me out on a hot date to a council fostering information event at a local community centre, and sort of sat there with a bunch of other people who were vaguely interested in fostering. As a male, middle-aged male, I was probably in a minority. Mostly it was couples or single women at the time. And the council had a little panel, if you like, of people, and a social worker spoke. And the social worker was just what I thought social workers were like, which is a terrible slur. She spoke in a language that I didn't understand. She kept talking about LACs, and I put my hand up because I'm not shy and went, "What is a LAC?" And she went, "It's an LAC." And I went, "All right, what is an LAC?" And she went, "It's a looked after child." And I went, "Oh, so the kids are called that." Except they're not called that anymore. They're called children in care. She then started to talk about panel, and I went, "What do you mean? What do you mean by panel?" And she went, "It's a group of people that decide whether you can foster." I went, "Okay." So all the time, jargon that I was not familiar with. And so I would say me and the social worker, we didn't get on particularly well. She was staring at me and I was staring back, and my wife was elbowing me going, "Shut up." And I'm going, if I'm going to do this, I want to know. Then a fantastic, unbelievable woman spoke to us, and she was a foster carer. And she was probably what I imagined a foster carer to look like. A lady, I'm going to say in the twilight of middle age, so 50s, and she was incredible. And she basically said, "Hi everybody, I'm knackered. I spent last night chasing a teenager with the police, around part of Liverpool because he'd legged it. And we eventually got him back into the car. He was 14, 15 years of age. And when we got him home, I had to call the police again because the other young person that lives with me, who was also in care, had got a boyfriend round. And a boyfriend was not just banned from the house, but he was a convicted drug dealer. And he was banned from the whole postcode. And I was like, hang on a minute. So you spent all night chasing a teenager around Liverpool. Then you've come home and you've got a drug dealer in your house. And you're trying to convince us to foster and do this. Are you nuts? I'm amazed you do this. I'm really glad you do it. There is not a chance that we are going to open up our semi-detached home. 2 kids who were primary school age. You know, we had a guinea pig. We had the whole lot. There's no way we're doing this. Not a chance. But the third person who spoke was a young woman, about 20, who'd been in care. And at the time, people who had been in care were sometimes known as plaques. So she was a lack, and then she became a plaque, previously looked after child. Could you think of a worse name to give a group of people? Or an ex-lack, so she was a former lack. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Anyway, she's now we would probably say care experienced. And she was 20 years of age. She looked at us, you know, we're all 40, 50, 60, I'd say, roughly. Not, you know, you have to be over 21 to foster, but most of us are a bit older. And she said, going into care is terrifying. Can you imagine for me if somebody said to you, you need to go and live with a stranger. You're not allowed to take anything with you. You don't know how long it'll be for, and you're never really going to have it fully explained why. If that scares you, imagine that you're then 4 or 5 years of age and that's happened to you. Because going into care is never easy. The reasons for kids going into care normally, not always, but normally there's been some drugs, some alcohol, some violence, some mental health, domestic violence. Sometimes there's prison, sometimes there's bereavement. It's never good reasons, and the number of kids going into care has gone up and up. I think it's probably, don't do me on the numbers, but it's probably doubled in the last 10, 15 years. It's over 80,000 in the UK. In the Northwest, it's particularly high. Liverpool, Blackpool, Blackburn, they're particularly high per head of population. It's like treble or quadruple in Blackpool what it is in a more affluent suburb, you know, in a richer city. So we thought, you know, maybe we should think about this some more. And at the time, our son, birth son, we don't really call him that, we just call him our son, but you know, differentiate sometimes. We said to him, he was going on a sleepover at his best friend's, and I think he was 5, and it was the first time he'd been on a sleepover that he wasn't going with his big sister, who was 7, and he wasn't going to a family member, like he wasn't going to a grandparent, he was going to his mate Dan's in a place called Old Swan. And I went, okay, Jamie, so that's my 5-year-old, get everything ready that you think you need to take to this sleepover. And he went, oh yeah, okay. So he basically emptied his entire bedroom into the hallway. And he went, this is what I need. He's only going for 1 night. And I went, oh, okay. So it looked like he was moving out. You know, I said, talk me through it then. What's all this then, Jay? And he goes, right, these are all the football tops because we're going to play football in the garden. So he got like every 5-year-old from Liverpool. He was Barcelona, Argentina, Liverpool, Tranmere Rovers. He had the lot. And I went, okay, so you're going to play football. You got your football tops. Then he got his spare clothes in case he got dirty, which made me laugh because he never normally cared about that. He'd got his Star Wars duvet, his R2-D2 pillow. He'd got a massive bag of Power Rangers because they were going to have a Power Ranger battle. He got a big bag of sweets from Home and Bargain. You know, we shoved it all in the car. The Vauxhall Astra, the foster carer's typical vehicle, because you can get a load of kids in. And we toddle off to Old Swan. It's about 15 minutes. And on the way there, he's chatting away because he's been chatting with Dan. Oh, when I get there, we're going to play footy in the garden. Then for our tea, we're going to have this because the mum and dad of Dan are our best friends. So our son Jamie has been there all the time. He can't remember not going there. There's 2 other girls, 2 daughters. They're best friends with our daughter. So he was going to a very familiar setting. And they planned what they were going to eat. They planned what they were going to do. They were going to watch like Britain's Got Talent and vote. Then they were going to play with their Power Rangers. Then they were going to build a camp. Then they were going to, you know, eat their sweets in the camp. And but when I dropped him off, he suddenly got that slight wobble that, you know, anybody who's got a child or anyone who's been on a sleepover suddenly gets that wobble. And I went, and he went, oh, and I went, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And you know, you're only, you know, I'll come and get you in the morning, and if you really, really want to come home, just ask, and Dan's dad will ring me and I'll come and get you. And he had the best time, you know, and I went to get him the next day and it was brilliant. But it made me think, and you can see where this is going, I'm sure. He was going to where he knew, with people he knew what the food was, he knew about the smells, he knew where the toilet was, he knew what the rules were, he knew everything about the place, and he was going for a finite time, one day, one night, not even a day, and he had a get out clause. If he needed to, he could have come home. And I just went home to my wife and I went, yeah, look, he was a little bit nervous. Can you imagine? I've never been in care. I've got a massive family. You know, neither is my wife. Can you imagine what it would be like to rock up with strangers who you don't know anything about? You don't know how they live. You don't even know who they are. You don't necessarily understand why you're in care. You don't even know what being in care means, because care sounds like a nice word. In care suddenly changes that dynamic. And so we kind of said to ourselves, maybe we could foster. I don't think we could do, you know, absconding teenagers, but let's apply, because if we apply, the only things that can happen are the council, because we applied to our council to foster, they might say, you can't do this, you're not the right people. Or because the process takes maybe 6 months, we might decide halfway through it, and now we know more, we don't want to. Or we might get all the way through, we might get approved, that's the phrase that foster carers use, by this panel of people. And then the adventure will really begin when a child will get a social worker ringing us up saying, hi, there's a kid, can I drop them off later today? A few funny stories. I was particularly naive when we first started. So I remember getting a social worker going, right, ringing us up. Normally they'd speak to my wife because she speaks a bit more sense than me and listens properly. And she said, oh, right, there's a 3.5-year-old arriving on Thursday. And we were, oh, yeah, great. So I got very excited. And I thought, 3.5, okay, we've got birth kids. I remember what that was like. So I got all this Peppa Pig cutlery and crockery from Asda. Sorry to promote Peppa Pig and Asda, but I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of them. So this little kid arrived with a social worker, and our kids were very excited. So they were 6 and 8. They took this 3.5-year-old into the lounge, said, oh, we'll watch telly with him while you talk to the social worker. We're like, yeah, okay. Anyway, a few minutes later, maybe 10 minutes, my daughter came in where we were chatting to the social worker and said, he doesn't recognise any telly, any TV at all. We've been through every channel. And I was like, oh, okay. Or maybe there was no TV where he lived. But anyway, let's have tea. So and so they came into where we kind of eat tea. The room I'm in now, it's like a big kitchen area. The social worker got off, left. And so suddenly you realise that, right, we've got this 3.5-year-old and we don't know much about him. I mean, because they don't know what there is to say about him. You know, they don't come with a manual, children. Every parent knows that. So anyway, I said to this little boy, who so far had said not one word, we've set this place for you at the table, and it's Peppa Pig. Look at this bowl, it's Peppa's bowl. And I was trying to be the daddy pig voice. And this kid stared at the floor. And then I went, oh, right. And then we were having like, pasta shapes and spaghetti, kind of like, spaghetti bolognese, sort of. And I went, oh, do you like spaghetti bolognese? Nothing, not a flicker of interest, kids staring at the floor. So we were looking at each other going, what should we do? I went, oh, maybe he doesn't like spaghetti bolognese. So we went to the cupboard and we got everything out and we went, do you like this? And we're like, do you like beans? Do you like chips? Do you like crisps? Do you like biscuits? Do you like bread? And we're like, is there anything? We will give you anything that you recognize. This kid just stared at the floor, and you're thinking, well, what do we do? And there is no answer. Nobody knows. This child is 3.5. He'd just come from birth family that day, I think, or maybe the day before. And so we just went, well, let's have tea and see what happens. So we started to eat our tea. We had our spaghetti bolognese. This little boy stood in the kitchen staring at the floor. And we were thinking, well, is he very autistic? Is he traumatized? Well, I don't know. Anyway, our birth kids then cleared off to watch more TV or go and do what they were doing. And this little boy was still stood there staring at the floor in our kitchen, maybe 20 minutes or so. And so me and my wife were clearing up, kind of giving each other eye rolling of like, What do we do? What happened? Who do we ring? Where's the hotline? Hi, we've got a child staring at the floor. What's the solution? But while we were tidying up, with our backs turned to him, we suddenly sensed he moved, and he moved from where he was stood, and he opened our fridge, which is like one of them posh integrated ones. You can't tell it's a fridge unless you're clever. He took out a full 4 pint of milk, and it was still sealed, never been used. And he bit the plastic off, and he bit the foil off, and he started to glug it down like glug, glug, glug. And it went all over him and all over the floor. And me and my wife, even though we were highly trained foster carers, just froze and went, Anyway, our son, who was, say, 6 or 7, came in, and he said to this little kid, "Oh, in our house, we've got cups," which we probably should have said. Took a cup out of the cupboard, took the milk off this little boy, poured it into the cup, showed him how to drink, handed it back to the little boy, and the little boy copied him. Just copied him, and he started to drink out of the cup. Now it all went down the sides of his mouth, but he basically drank from the cup. And we had a kind of amazing Damascus moment of, oh right, okay, so this kid doesn't know what a cup is until our son showed him. This kid doesn't know about sitting at tables and cups and Peppa Pig and bowls and spoons and forks. And we worked out in the first few hours of him living with us, he didn't know what a bath was. He had no idea what hot running water was or cold running water. He had no idea about TV. He had no idea about beds and duvets. And we think, because we reckon he'd been watching us and he'd spotted we were going to this place where the milk was, the fridge. So there must have been milk where he had grown up or where he'd been. And we went, okay, so he somehow lived by finding milk or drinking milk. And in the next 24 hours, we found out a lot more about him. So for example, I took him, we live right by Penny Lane, and I took him down Penny Lane on a walk, and we ended up in the park at the end of Penny Lane. And he suddenly, he really hadn't said a word yet. He suddenly went crazy, screaming the word Dippy, Dippy. And I was looking around the park going, what looks like it could be called Dippy? And then I realized it was a chippy. Somebody had a chippy tea. And I went, oh, it's a chippy tea. He's recognized a chippy tea. So I ran into this cafe with this little 3.5-year-old. He was screaming his head off, going, Dippy, Dippy, Dippy. Kind of pushed my way to the front of the queue, to be fair. Threw all the money I had at the lady in the chippy in the cafe. I went, I need chips now. And she gave me a portion of chips, which I handed to this screaming child. And as soon as he got them in his hand, he went dead quiet. And I went, phew. And then I realized the whole cafe was looking at me. And I'm reckoning, I'm not a mind reader, but I'm figuring half the cafe were going, look at that crap dad giving in to that tantrum. He hasn't got a clue. I bet he's one of them single divorced dads just looking after a child on a Saturday. What a rubbish idiot. And I reckon the other half of the cafe were going, thank goodness it was that man having a kick off with his kid and not me. Anyway, I just thought, none of you've got a clue what you're watching here, because you don't know that I don't know this child. I've only known him 24 hours. So anyway, I went home and I went to my wife, we carried these chips home. I went, guess what? I found something out. He knows what chips are. And my wife went, we showed him chips. I went, no, we didn't. We showed him frozen McCain's chips. That's not what chips look like. Chips look like they've come in a paper bag and they're cooked and they smell. And so we worked out, and it went, right, okay, so he knows what chips are. And we worked out that he knew what sausage rolls were and pasties and hot dogs. So if it was a takeaway food cooked in a bag, he knew what it was and he would eat it. And we were finding all this out. And when you're a foster carer, you do daily records. You're kind of like a reporting mechanism for the social workers and for the courts. So you're filling all these forms in saying, child appeared to not recognize duvet, bed, sofa, television, any TV channel, warm running water. Child knew what milk was. And, you'd explain all these stories. And this is giving an insight. So you're thinking, right, where has this child been where there was no food that would be, shall we say, suitable or appropriate for a toddler? Where was this child where he thought when it was bedtime, he just lay on the floor under his coat, and you're going, right, this is not what you're meant to be like as a 3.5-year-old. Poor educational outcomes, they're more likely to get fewer GCSEs, more likely to be excluded, they're much more likely to end up homeless, they're much more likely to end up in prison. And there's a big move to make care experience a protected characteristic. And I can't quite get my head around what that means, but I do know that there's a few myths. One is, if you remove a child early enough, there's no damage done, and that isn't true. The removal of a child from birth mother is traumatic, and trauma happens in the gestation period in utero, especially if there's violence and alcohol and drugs. So removing a child early is better, but it doesn't mean that this child will have no memory. The body keeps the score, is the phrase. And we always say in fostering and adoption, we count the first 1,000 days as crucial, but we count them from conception, not from birth. So we don't, you're not 3, you're 2. So there's that aspect, but also as a characteristic, adoption doesn't solve trauma. It's not like, oh, it's not Little Orphan Annie and then there's all singing and dancing. It's like, it's just not the case. And I know often in the media, the shocking stories of children that were taken from mothers whose only crime, if you like, was they were unmarried or unwed, back in the day, 50s, 60s, 70s, although that still happened in the 80s and even the 90s. That's a terrible thing. But the children that we take away from birth parents now tend to have massive amounts of trauma. It's absolutely not their fault. And they need a lot of our love and our care and our patience, and maybe all sorts of counselling. And there's all sorts of therapy that you can get, because these are just they're just kids, they're just people, and they need our help. And I believe deep down, that trauma can be healed, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. Probably families are the best place for that to happen. I keep coming back to that. And a family can look like ours, say dead boring, mum, dad, 2 kids, pebble dash, semi-detached, compost bin, but it could be a single person, it could be a gay couple, it could be any, families come in all shapes and sizes. So don't think nuclear, don't think bog standard. And that's where a lot of the healing takes place, which is just actually being safe.
I'm sure you'll all agree that it's a shame we haven't got Phil here today to say thank you for his talk. I'm sure you'll want to see the full video because he's just an amazing man, so interesting to speak to, and he had some really important insights, I think, there into things that we need to consider around adoption and fostering. I'm sorry we've had to go so quickly through all our speakers, but we are on to our last speaker now, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions and answers and a bit of discussion, and whether we can maybe revisit this topic again. So our last speaker today is Laura Mashin. Let me know if I've said that wrong, Laura, who is a researcher who is going to talk to us about the mental health needs of adoptive parents. Are you here, Laura?
Yeah, thanks, Lena. Shall I share my screen now?
Yes, please.
Great, thanks. Now, hopefully you can see that. Can you let me know if you can see that? Is that okay, everyone?
Yeah, it's fine.
There we are, great, thank you. I'll just try and open that if I can. There we are. Great, thank you. Well, thanks very much, Selena, and the team for inviting me to speak. I'm very grateful. It's the first time I'm presenting on this topic, despite me talking about this for what feels like a lifetime. So bear with me, all very new at this. So I'm Laura. I'm a professor at Lancaster Uni, and I research the social and ethical aspects of health and medicine. I'm a qualitative researcher by training, and for my sins, I'm also the chair of our faculty research ethics committee. And that's just important because it's one like what we go on to talk about later on in this talk about the ethical considerations when you're working with adopters and prospective adopters to do research. I'm also a member, I sit on the all-party parliamentary group for adoption and permanence, and I am an adopter and I'm also an adoptee. So we've heard lots from Paula and from Tracy and Phil, so I won't repeat what's already been said, but this is just the highlights of, like Tracy said, of what I understand of adoption today as an adoptive parent. I think research shows that when children are adopted, there is a greater stability and improved child developmental outcomes. And I'm thinking there about some research that was conducted about around 10 years ago now that showed about greater social competence, reading and language skills. However, as Paula and I think Tracy has highlighted, adoption rates are decreasing. And like Paula was saying there, you know, there is that kind of query that around, is it the COVID effect, just fewer adoptions taking place, or is it that there are fewer adopters, fewer people coming forward to think about adoption and considering that as part of their family planning, for example. So I'm wondering if there are fewer adopters there. And again, as we've heard, there are more children are remaining in care. They may be remaining in care for longer. And as a result of that, they're more likely now, as Tracy was describing that term of modern adoption, they're more likely to be adopted at an older age or as part of a sibling set. The majority now of children, and again, I think is what, forgive me, what the foster carer, I've forgiven the other lady's name, was saying there, that the majority of these children in care are likely to have experienced these significant traumatic events, real early adversity. And they, when you end as an adopter, Tracy might, and other foster carers might agree with me, where you end up speaking to, you fall into that trap of using the same jargon as the professionals you're interacting with, and so you start talking about ACEs as for you know, adverse childhood experiences. It's a rather bizarre thing when you think about the acronyms that are used. But as Phil has just highlighted there to us, this trauma, this early adversity is having, research has shown us is having an impact on that child's brain development, and as a result of their behaviours and their thoughts and their feelings, which are lifelong. You hope that you, as Phil, to use language, you know, you hope you can heal, but there are scars. And as a result of that, there is an impact upon that family. And that also is including the adopter's mental health. There's research, the little research has shown us. There is a lack of research, however, that does focus on prospective adopters and adopters' needs, particularly in the UK. There's been literature reviews done that have shown us that there is lots of research done overseas, predominantly in the States, and less here in the UK. And so we've set up the Adopters Advocacy project, which really is aiming to bring into focus the needs of prospective adopters and adopters without diminishing the needs of adoptees and their birth families. And that's set up at the moment, it's live. And one of the projects we're working on at the moment is focusing on adopters' mental health in particular. So it's a live project. We're in the process of recruiting at the moment. We're recruiting at this stage, we're recruiting adopters, so people who have got children placed. And really it's to start that conversation. It's to reduce or remove that silence that can exist around mental health for adopters. It's to look at and try and understand what support is currently available to adopters when they are experiencing mental health challenges, but also what support adopters would want to benefit their mental health and at what stages of the process, and really to try and think about whether there's a portfolio of support available for adopters rather than just thinking of a one-off solution. which is available at all stages of when you're adopting. And so I also I'm going to be exploring with adopters how they would wish for their mental health experiences to be researched, appreciating it is an incredibly difficult topic for discussion. So today I just want to briefly share what we know already about adopters' mental health in research, to highlight just 2 areas of future research that we wish to focus on, but are really to promote and encourage this idea of being responsible when we're doing research, that it is sensitively done. And so I will just discuss just a handful of research challenges that we're facing at the moment at Adopters Advocacy. Think about that research design considerations, and to ensure as best you can ever do that research is ethically done. Now, I'm just here really as just the front woman, if you like. I'm really, this is the work that I'm presenting today is based on work that's been undertaken by 2 clinical psychology trainees, so that's Lacey and Rhiannon, and a clinical doctor, Lena. And I'm also I'm working with my current research at the moment is with Ellie. So really, it's thanks to them that I've managed to pull this together. So one of the key areas we're looking to explore with researchers is this idea of post-adoption depression and secondary trauma. So as an adopter, you're informed about post-adoption depression during the assessment and training process to become an approved adopter. So that's talked about, it's known about, it's written about. However, what is less well known is for the potential and for adopters to experience secondary trauma. And approximately 32% of all UK adopters have become depressed, and the references there are from the existing research, so it's not based on our current research at the moment that we're doing with Adopters Advocacy. And what we found out in the literature, in the research literature, is that if you have experienced secondary trauma, you're also then vulnerable to compassion fatigue. And of course, we may know and hear now of compassion fatigue more than ever now because of what's happened at COVID and with the healthcare professionals and particularly in the care homes. Excuse me, we've got we're more likely to be able to talk hopefully more openly about compassion fatigue, but secondary trauma is still something that is less well understood and less discussed. The other area that we're hoping to explore is this adoption disruption, and I hope I'm not causing any offence with the language and the terminology I'm using. I'm well aware that there are different terms used in different language, like adoption breakdown or the adoption placement coming to an end. So I don't want to cause any offence or upset, but this is one of the terms that is used in the research literature. And that's when a family is considered to be in crisis, or the child has been removed from the adoptive home and returned to foster care. From what I understand, and I'm very open to being told otherwise and learning from others who are more experienced in this than I am, the official national statistics of adoption disruption is currently unknown or unavailable publicly. There is, in the research literature, we've managed to find figures ranging from 20 to 50% of all UK adoptions. As I say, whether that is, we can't confirm that in terms of having that national statistics available that we can find currently. But either way, the figures that are reported for the UK adoption disruption in the literature is significantly higher than other countries such as in America, where it's actually around 9–10%. Research has shown that the key predictors for adoption disruption is about the age of a child when they are placed in an adopted home, the child's behaviours due to their early adversity that they've experienced early on in their lives, the lack of pre-placement preparation for adopters, knowing that child. I mean, there's lovely descriptions there by Phil about that child. He was describing you know, what they need, what they like. Those simple things make the world a difference. Also being able to understand, for some adopters I've been speaking to have shared that not really being able to grasp what developmental delay looks like in practice. And so it's just that lack of pre-preparation there, pre-placement preparation. And then the lack of post-placement support from services. When we've launched Adopters Advocacy, we have been overwhelmed by the response from adopters in particular, and the stories that they're sharing already with us are really highlighting to us that they do feel unsupported, forgotten about, and really quite neglected, which then has an impact on themselves as human beings, as you would do, as anybody would do. Conversely, I will say that the research has also shown that when accessible, i.e. not going through the adoption support fund, not having to go through a social worker or an adoption agency, for example, and independent support, so support that is independent of a social worker, of an adoption agency, is actually a real factor to ensure that they're less likely to experience secondary trauma, and then they're less likely for that placement to break down. And that to me is really telling. It's something we really want to look into at Adopters Advocacy. So there's just two of the areas that we want to focus on going forward. If I now share with you that the challenges that we're trying to grapple with, we're trying to work through in terms of designing our projects, our research. And one of the things we've learned from looking back at past research studies is being able to retain adopters' engagement in that research. So particularly if there's been a multiple phases to the study, or if it's been a longitudinal research, they've really struggled to retain all 100% of those that started out at the very beginning. And so we're trying to think about that study design. We're trying to make sure that if we are doing research, we are thinking about that level of commitment that was required from prospective adopters or adopters, so that we can retain and gather their stories. Think about the recruitment. At the moment, we're extending our period of recruitment so that it overlaps with data collection. Now, any researcher will tell you that that's quite common. However, we're extending it quite considerably. And we're also thinking about increasing the number of participants we're recruiting to ensure that our project is still viable when participants withdraw. So we're anticipating that. And again, when you're writing your ethics approval form, we're also thinking we're going to have to increase our number, expecting some type of dropout rate, so that we can ensure that we've still got a viable data set that we can do something with. There's no point overburdening participants, those people who have participated, to find that we can do very little with the data. So that's how we're approaching it at the moment. Our data collection, as I said, we've got this prolonged period of data collection. So I'm trying to give as many dates and as many different times as possible. I'm trying to do it in different ways so that I'm trying to allow people the choice really that works for them. There's nothing worse as an adopter. I feel very flaky a lot of the time. I always feel like I'm letting people down, and actually to be able to say I can't do this date but I could do this date in a few weeks, that's really, it's still sort of supportive, still a positive. I'm also allowing people longer time to reflect. So when I'm writing an ethics form, I would typically give 2 weeks for participants to withdraw from a study before I would then go on to use their data in the study. Actually, I'm giving longer for adopters and prospective adopters. I'm giving them more like 4 weeks, just for people to reflect. There's the potential for regret. I've learned that from working with people who have donated embryos. Regret is real, and what you share in that very intimate environment, that date when you're doing an interview, for example, or you're with your what you feel like your peers in a focus group, you can overshare. And we joke about oversharing perhaps, but you can overshare. You get caught up and swept with it. You then go away. You might worry. You might, in the middle of the night, you might overanalyzing, overthinking. And actually, I've just given that longer time for periods to say, actually, I don't want that. And also, not only just the right to withdraw, but just also the option to maybe say, when I talked about this, can you not include that? And that's okay. I'm trying to empower the adopters, the people, to still participate, still share their stories, but also then allow them to have control over that, how it's used, what we use in the research. I think the other thing we've learned about from the existing studies that have been conducted with adopters and prospective adopters is the difficulty really to admit those challenges. the fear, and it's a very real fear, it's a felt fear, that if you feel you dare to say you're struggling, that the placement the children will be taken away, or the placement will automatically end, and it's you live with that, and and as a result you become quite silenced, you become quite afraid to speak up and speak out. And also because of the anxiety and depression that people, adopters, can be experiencing, that can be really hard then to come forward, to declare that. Really to understand as a researcher, to really learn that full extent, the depth and range of adopters' emotions. It's really challenging, I think. And I think people may not want to participate. We definitely have people who have said, I'm happy to join the network, but I don't want to participate in this study. It's just too raw right now. I can't talk about this right now. Now's not the time. I'd want to be able to support your work, but I can't. And really, there's that idea then as a researcher of going, so we're still not, we may still not be getting to the real bottom of it, the real depth of that, because people are still unable to talk about it. And equally, when you look at other research that's been done, adopters, as you might imagine, like listening to the foster carers as well, and Tracy talking, you're more likely to focus on the children than talk about yourselves. And I think that's a challenge. How do you still access the stories and get them to focus on the adopters? So one of the things we've done is to take some inspiration really from researchers who explore experiences with people who experience trauma, but through other means. So we've been focusing on articles. One of the things I've been looking at is focusing on articles written about researchers who work with people who've been physically or sexually abused, people who are at their end of life or experienced cancer. So I'm taking inspiration from them as researchers. I'm trying to focus on creating a safe space for adopters so they're able to share their experiences, and also trying to build that rapport and trust. So one of the things we're sort of grappling about with at the moment at Adopters Advocacy is thinking about individual or joint interviews, giving people a choice on a case-by-case basis. That do they want that interview or that data sharing to be done in person or at distance? Emails, for example, using a phone rather than Teams, for example. Does that make it easier to share? We're considering providing a list of questions and then asking participants to record their responses and sharing that recording with the researcher, so that researcher isn't in that moment with them. They can then choose which questions they do want to answer and choose the ones they don't want to answer, that is just too hard to talk about or isn't relevant to them. Looking at creative modes, thinking about asking people to or make a suggestion about writing poetry or providing photos, journaling, or even letter writing themselves to who they want to write their letter with, but sharing that with us as their data, as their contribution. And we're also thinking about providing stimuli, so a case study, some newspaper articles, even song lyrics, just to try and create a distance for adopters and prospective adopters, but still enabling them to talk about situations and circumstances that matter to them, that resonate with them, but it's at that arm's length. And that particularly has come from from researchers who work with people who've experienced PTSD. And that was one of the suggestions I got from them. And finally, a very practical reason, and I know I'll be talking to people who will totally get it and will understand this idea about, there's a safeguarding element to this when you're working with people who are prospective adopters and adopters. You really want to avoid any identity being revealed and any sharing of demographic details. So one of the things we're thinking about here is trying to be a bit creative, using infographics as part of when we're disseminating our findings, and also thinking about summarising or grouping participants and then sharing multiple quotes. So, for example, typically when you're disseminating qualitative research, and again, I'm sure you'll all know this, but you would usually have quite a nice description of the person because you want that person there. And then you might have that quote that follows, and then another lovely description. And actually what we think we're going to do is group participants, and so that participants who have adopted siblings in the last 4 years claimed, and then have quite a few extracts, just to minimise that risk of people becoming identifiable to their local authority, to their social workers, for their children's sake, for their own sake, any kind of safeguarding issues. So it's just still trying to allow people to be frank, to be open, to dare to say the hard stuff that is hard to say and the hard stuff that is hard to hear. But I'm trying to allow them to still get that message across without risking anything for them. So in conclusion, what we've found so far at Adopters Advocacy, and like I said, I'm just sharing the work of the people that of Rhiannon and Lacey and Lena and Ellie. Adopters are a neglected community. Their voices are seldom heard, and really research is playing a vital role in changing this. I'm really passionate about researchers collaborating with adopters to design research that will enable those adopters to share their experiences, rather than us coming as a team and saying, and this is what we're doing. It makes research ethics challenging. I accept that. We are going to have to think about the application forms. There will be amendments, no doubt, but I think it's worth the effort. And I think that research that focuses on our adopters' experiences has the potential to really bring about some positive changes in adoption policy, process and practice for everybody involved, and really ensure that any changes we're wanting to see are evidence-based. Thanks very much, Selena.
That was fascinating, Laura. Really, so many lessons for us around this topic, but also just research in general, and how to do good research, ethics, safeguarding. It's not just about getting a form filled, is it? It's about really considering that whole topic. We've got about 10 minutes left. There's been all sorts of comments and questions in the chat. I don't think we'll have time to do all of it. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question now of any of our speakers, or to make a comment of any kind? You can put your hand up. I don't know whether Rhiannon, whether you want to say anything.
Yeah, thanks, Selena. I've put a number of thoughts in chat. As usual, what a great Seldom Heard forum. Well done to the organisers of this. It's always very special. Thank you, and thanks to the speakers today. Brilliant, very open, and really inspiring. So what was going through my mind a lot of the time as I was listening to people was, while it was very clear from several of you that adoption can't fix wounds that exist prior to the fostering or adoption, it does seem to me as though there's something going wrong with the system that we've got here in the UK, that means that it's not working to best effect. And that came out really clearly, I think, in Laura's talking about adoption. Oh gosh, I can't remember the word she used, but basically, I guess adoption failure being so high in this country. It's a clue, isn't it, that something is not working right? And I just sort of like the thoughts of the speakers and anybody else who wants to say anything about what can be changed, what can be done.
Thanks, Rhiannon. I can see Sandra's hand up. Do you want to come in there, Sandra?
Yeah, I'm just saying about you know, what Phil said about when you go to one of these meetings about becoming a foster carer or becoming a you know, adoption. They actually frighten the life out of you. They really do. They give you the worst scenarios, which is, yes, okay, you need the worst scenarios, but you also don't get the positive scenarios. So we need to look at sort of the systems on how the benefits are sold to future people that want to be involved. And And it's about how well you can do, how good you can do, rather than, you know, you're going to have to police turning up on your doorstep in the middle of the night and you're going to be running around town. Yes, I've been there, I've done that, I've got a t-shirt. But again, and the system sort of also is about, you know, the social workers are so overworked. And you also have a number of like assistants, and I don't think, in my personal view, some of them are actually trained to the right level of understanding. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. We had one who used to bring the child to me on a Friday, and before she got to my house, she'd take her to McDonald's. Now, this child eats rubbish all week, and I'm like, please don't take her to McDonald's. Well, I need to spend half an hour with her and have a chat. I said, don't feed her. I'll feed her correct food. So it's all these type of things about where the system is trying to do what's best for the child, but sometimes the child needs to be an individual and the system needs to adapt to the child.
Thank you, Sandra. It's very valuable. Paula, I think, had her hand up next.
I just a couple of points, Rhiannon. I'd say that what we're missing is, remember Sure Start, when we used to look after young people and parents? That's missing. We need that massively, because we've got massive inequalities, and people don't know how to do it. So we need to step in, we need to step up and do our stuff. And the second thing I'd say is where the system is failing is in schools, where lots of schools do not want children in care in their school, because they mess up the statistics, they take a lot of money, a lot of time, etc. So they will, some schools, not all schools, will try their hardest to make sure your foster child does not go to that school. And then they end up in the not very good school, and then it starts to cycle again. So those are my 2 points. Early intervention and schooling needs to be more inclusive.
Thanks, Paula. Tracy, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Just thinking back to why adoptive parents may find it difficult to share how they are struggling. I think a lot of adoptive parents have been through a huge journey themselves to eventually become a parent. A lot of them have, you know, tried for many years to have a baby, been through IVF, they've been through the works. So by the time they get this child, it is so important to them, and they want it to be so right that it's difficult then to admit that things maybe aren't going quite as well as they should be, or as you know, in their mind they should be. And I think that can create that difficulty to open up and be honest. And I think that's where the parent supporting parents comes in, because we can all be honest with each other. There's no professionals involved. So if one person opens up and shares how they're feeling, it tends to then open up the floodgates for everybody else to say, actually, I can relate to that. It's really, really hard in this way and that way. That's just something that I was thinking when Laura was talking then.
That's a really good point, Tracy. And I think I've read about some new schemes where they're encouraging people to foster very early, so that that fostering is aimed to become an adoption, but it allows a much earlier, quicker introduction to a child, and maybe that sort of thing might help. Or, you know, do you think that adoptive parents should maybe be encouraged to consider foster care first before they adopt, so that they get more used to how it can really be to be in this system? I don't know.
I think foster to adopt is becoming more of a common thing to happen, but it's also a risk that that child could then go back to their parents. So
yeah,
it's then that challenge of, do you go all out to get attached to this child that may be then taken back?
Yeah, it's got its difficulties as well. I don't know that there's anyone else that wants to say anything, but I'm recognizing that we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I just wanted to say that there was a comment in the chat from Paul about, you know, how often in the Seldom Heard forums, you know, what really people want to hear is what's going to happen next and how do we move forwards with this. So I really recognize that people have shared some really, you know, powerful and important lived experience today. So I definitely don't want us to just move on and not come back to this. So I'm definitely going to commit to us having a follow-up to this and staying in touch with Laura and Tracy, and maybe looking at how the ARC can support research around this topic further as we carry on. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming today and all your time and everything that you've shared, and thank you so much to our speakers and to the rest of my team for organising another really powerful Seldom Heard forum. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be back in touch soon to see how we can follow up. So thank you.